us that found this location today from parking lot 5. Didn't it seem like it was a treasure hunt that we were following these little signs? Yes, very nice signs. And I think today's presentation is really the reward. So this is the end of our treasure hunt. So welcome everybody to our program meeting, Understanding the New Normal Disability Studies at UCLA. This is very exciting, I think, for all of us to get familiar with your work. I'm going to introduce Lucy Blackmar. She's an Assistant Vice Provost, Undergraduate Education Initiative. The Undergraduate Education Initiative unit collaborates with faculty and departments across the campus to design, implement, and promote, innovate interdisciplinary educational programs for the students at UCLA, which includes the Disability Studies minor. In her role, Lucy is developing and implementing innovative curricular programs for undergraduate students, including the noted Fiat Lux. I'll have to know what that is. The Fiat
Let there be light, our university model.
Seminar series it's a freshman cluster program and several interdisciplinary minors such as disability studies, civic engagement, and entrepreneurship. So please meet Lucy, who will now also introduce her staff. Thank you.
And not my staff, our panelists. Anyhow. Okay, on behalf of the UCLA College Division of Undergraduate Education, welcome to what I hope you will find to be a very interesting afternoon. Nothing gives me more pleasure than to introduce to you today a remarkable group of panelists who will share some of the groundbreaking work at UCLA in disability studies. In my 30 years as a broker of initiatives to improve undergraduate education on our campus, no program has inspired me more on both a personal and intellectual level. Personally, my introduction to disability studies came to my late daughter, Jessie, who attended UC Berkeley with a series of late onset neurological disabilities and was able to thrive there because of the wonderful system of accommodation on that campus. But it is not the accommodations and the welcoming community for a disabled person that was the noteworthy piece of Jessie's education. It was the intellectual transformation that came from her association with a group of faculty and students under the umbrella of disability studies. Jessie's experience at Berkeley opened my eyes to the remarkable scholarship occurring at home on our very own campus. In 2007, I had the privilege of working with a faculty team across 16 different disciplines at UCLA to launch a new minor in disability studies. We are proud here today at UCLA to have in our relatively new program the most distinguished disability studies faculty in the country. And 3 of them are with us today, along with a recent graduate from the program. And they are here to together tell you about the program, its popularity among our students, and what we are trying to accomplish with teaching, scholarship, and service, as well as some of the exciting things we have planned for the future. So we're going to start with a short film montage from the many events we've sponsored through disability studies in the last few years, and then segue quickly to our moderator for today, who is Professor Helen Deutsch from the Department of English, who served as the inaugural chair for the Disability Studies minor and is a renowned scholar of 18th century literature and is recognized nationally for her work in disability studies. From Helen, we will go to Professor Victoria Marks from World Arts and Cultures and Dance. And Vic is our current chair of disability studies, and she has brought a few video segments from her choreographed work so that she can show you, and not simply tell you, what disability studies is all about. Following Vic, we're very pleased to have UCLA's first ever American Sign Language instructor with Ben Lewis, who will share with us some of the amazing work he's doing with our undergraduates who are studying American Sign Language. And by the way, American Sign Language is now the fourth most popular language among college students across the country. And the demand is growing on our campus as well. And we're very pleased that in the coming year, a second instructor is being brought in to meet that demand. Finally, we want you to hear from one of our students. Jessica Kienmod graduated in a minor last spring with a bachelor's in psychology. She not only fully engaged in all dimensions of this rich minor, including an internship in the UCLA Early Childhood Partial Hospitalization Program, but along the way, her outstanding achievements earned her the Samuel Ocean Scholarship in Disability Studies, which we are thrilled to have as a part of our program due to the enormous generosity of your fellow philanthropist who is here today with us, Linda Ocean. Thank you so very much. I might add that Jessica's final capstone project was so outstanding that she also was awarded the Jesse Alpaugh Senior Prize in Disability Studies, which is a student award my family endowed in honor of our late daughter and continues to honor her and enrich my life. So again, welcome, and without any further ado, I'm pleased to share the video and then pass the mic to Helen.
The biggest draw to the DS minor for me was when I first came into it, I thought that I knew a lot about disabilities because I had grown up with it, but then I've learned so much more that I didn't know. Professor Vic Marks showed us the video that she did with choreographic disability. I have a theater background, and I thought that that was the coolest thing, being able to use people's disabilities not as a hindrance, but as a part of the art that she created.
Disability studies really gives us tools to think about how the normative body is constructed, and that's something that can relate to so many different fields. So if we're talking about architecture, design, anthropology, English, it encourages creative thinking and new perspectives. So I think that students can begin to look at people with disabilities as innovators in their field. Coming from my perspective of teaching predominantly about autism, I feel many of my students have their eyes opened that they never have thought about it as a positive difference. Often they've been informed by tragedy models or medical models, and so their minds are blown, and it's really exciting for them.
I'd grown up with like, we need to cure autism, we need to cure autism, and that always seemed like, yeah, that sounds great. And now I'm like, well, maybe a cure is possible, but it might not be what we should be looking towards. We should be looking more towards acceptance and tolerance, and I loved that I was able to learn that in a class here at UCLA.
So a lot of people think, well, disability is like deafness and blindness or autism and various different kinds of disabilities, you know. Often in mainstream society, the eradication of those things is the goal, you know. But we're coming from a slightly different perspective on the imagination of what the future might look like for deaf people in America. And it's a sense not so much of disability, but rather the history of a people.
Disability is a universal thing. It covers all aspects of life, and it's very likely to touch every one of us in some way during our life. Pathway is a program designed to give students with intellectual disabilities an opportunity to have a college experience here at UCLA. So they live near campus, they take classes, and participate in as many aspects of campus life as possible. We use the interns to act as educational coaches for our students, helping them with their academic studies. So that's a great student-to-student connection.
Going through the internships, many of our students are planning to go into the helping or the medical profession. So they want to be doctors, they want to be occupational therapists, they want to be speech therapists. But I think that helping role, once they get into the field, can be reoriented to a more partnership role. So they're able to see that the people that they will be working with have very valuable perspectives that can inform them the way that they will be providing care in the future.
Because every single person who participates in the minor is very passionate about some aspect of the field. I really like how it has opened up my perspectives on the world and on the disability rights movement.
It was a New York Times article saying that disability studies is the new normal. I mean, it clearly is such an energized and energizing field. But we still don't have a solid home on campus. So it's like we're not fully located yet in the university landscape and in the community. I think what would be so amazing if we could have an endowed chair, if we could have someone with both the vision and the time to devote to really developing this program, that just like the sky would be the limit.
Worlds apart, worlds apart.
Same stars through my window that you see through yours, but we're worlds apart, worlds apart.
Just like the earth, just like the sun.
Two worlds
Two worlds are better than one. I see the friendship in your eyes that you see in mine. But we're worlds apart, worlds apart, together, but worlds apart.
Can everybody hear me? I'm Helen Deutsch, and I just want to thank you all for joining us today and for giving us this wonderful opportunity to tell you more about this incredibly exciting and thriving field here at UCLA. I want to thank Lucy for that amazingly generous introduction. And I think she really underestimated, and I will speak a little bit at the end, about how hard she worked personally to put this minor into place. It took a lot more than 2007, I can tell you. And so my job today, or what I want to talk to you about today, oh, and I wanted to thank Andy Rice, who's right there behind us, who made that wonderful video for everyone today. I thought he did an amazing job. Thank you so much. And that's just one indication of the huge range of disciplines, topics, approaches that inform this field. And so I'm going to talk to you about how disability studies transformed my own perspective on my research, how it transformed my way of thinking about my work as a teacher and a scholar, how it really changed my life, and how it led to my being the first chair of this minor. And I really want to stress here something that Lucy said and something that the amazingly photogenic and articulate students in the video said. It always amazes me that our students are so camera ready. It's phenomenal. That the minor has brought so many people together because of the passion people have for this field. This is a field that people are personally passionate about, enthusiastic about, and invested in for a wide range of reasons. And I think the video gave you a taste of the kind of passion that this field inspires in all of our students. These courses are tremendously popular, and they're continuing to grow. So I also want to stress too that the minor, both in its history and in its ongoing sort of thriving, really epitomizes UCLA because the minor is all about collaboration. It's about collaboration between different scholars from different fields. It's about intellectual curiosity, and it is about inclusion in every sense, and especially inclusion in the sense of different perspectives on the question of disability. And what that means, Annie, in her comments, that was Annie Tucker, who is one of our graduate students in disability studies. Vic and I both supervised her master's thesis. Vic worked with her further on her dissertation. Annie was talking about what she calls the medical model, right? And what disability studies is about is challenging this idea of the medical model, that disability is a physical fact that needs to be cured, it's an aberration, it's something that's wrong. Disability instead, our idea of disability studies, the general idea of disability studies, brings together what we call North and South Campus. It brings together the psychiatrist labs and the choreographer studios, brings together the law school, brings together the history department, it brings together the English department, all these different parts of campus to talk about disability as a critical framework for thinking about the body in all its variation in relation to society and culture. And disability encompasses, when you start to think about it and think about what is disability, it encompasses so many different forms of physical and mental differences. Autism was mentioned. We saw people in wheelchairs. There's actually debate in the disability community about what should be the symbol of disability, right? We all think of the figure of the person in the wheelchair on the restroom door, but that only begins to cover all the possible ways that disability exists in our world. And it is therefore the ultimate form of diversity, and it touches everybody's lives, which is one of the reasons that people are so passionate about it. So I'm going to give you two little stories that can give you a sense of my own investment in the field. I am an 18th century scholar, so what the heck am I doing running the disability studies minor? Well, the field claimed me. I didn't know it existed. I wrote a book about Alexander Pope, who was the greatest poet of 18th century England, who was known for the students abominated, most of the students who take my courses really get sick of the heroic couplet, which are rhyming pentameter lines. Pope was the perfect master of the heroic couplet and a master of perfect form. He was also physically deformed. He was a hunchback. Everybody in the 18th century knew that Pope was deformed, talked about his disability. He was a satirist, he was mean to people. They therefore attacked him back and did caricatures of him, looking like an ape, looking like a rat. No literary critic had spoken of it, ever. This gives you a sense of how disability can be at once invisible and hypervisible in our culture at the same time. So I wrote a book called Resemblance and Disgrace that argued that Pope's deformity was at the center of his imagination of himself as an author and someone who made money for the first time, was the first professional, self-supporting professional poet in English. And I was contacted by someone who said, we're reviewing your book for the Disability Studies Quarterly, and I was like, what is that? When I figured out that this field existed, was interested in what I had to say, and was interested in what I had to say because I was giving Pope back his voice as a disabled person, I really began to get it, and it changed my work ever since. I spoke to a much wider audience. I did NEH seminars for high school teachers. I taught a much wider range of students. I spoke to scholars across a variety of disciplines. And I continued my work in the 18th century because the other sort of interesting fact about the 18th century is that almost every male canonical author in the 18th century was disabled in some way. So I went on to do a book on Samuel Johnson, and I will bore you later if you want to know all the many disabilities that Samuel Johnson had, including now we think Tourette's. And I'm currently working on Jonathan Swift, whose skull was dug up in the 1820s so that people could decide, put an end to the controversy over whether or not Swift was mad. Because his irony was so powerful, so disorienting, so difficult and confrontational that people would rather have thought he was mad than to take his irony seriously. So this is all of the ways in which disability studies transformed my work and made me think about access in the sense of intellectual access, and made me participate in a conversation that gave me a much broader sense of my own work's importance. So it was hugely beneficial for me. The second story is about a scholar who was here at UCLA for a number of years, a medievalist named Christopher Baswell, who wrote an amazing essay that appeared in the Times of London, arguing for disability studies in England, called "Only at the Bodleian Am I a Cripple." Chris Baswell went to Oberlin. He was an artsy kid. He was a dancer, a very talented dancer, and he ended up getting in a car accident and was paralyzed from the waist down, could no longer dance. Until later, he saw Access and some of the work that people like Vic are doing and realized that it was still a possibility. But in any case, the article he wrote was about how when he went to graduate school at Yale as a medievalist, he's a medieval literature expert, he could enter, there was access, as we have here. He could go to the library, he could do his work, and he could thrive as a scholar. When he went to Oxford and wanted to enter the great Bodleian Library, there was no way to get in. There was no ramp. And there he was a cripple. He used very pointedly the word cripple, which was current in the medieval period and the Renaissance period, which we now consider an insult, in order to make the point that because of the built environment, not because of his ability to enter, because of the way the Bodleian chose to build their buildings and to refuse access, he became a cripple in the way that crippled beggars used to throng the steps of the Bodleian. He makes a very impassioned argument for both for access and, he says, the dignity to be able to recount the history of his own people, whom he considers the history of the disabled community that he's a part of. So there are 2 points that story made, and that story was the story I used when I got the minor approved in all the various committees that Lucy and I had to sit before and make the case for disability studies. 2 points. That disability is not just an abstract idea or a critical framework, which is part of it, but it's also a collective identity, and it's a community. That's very, very important. And second of all, disability, again, isn't just a fact, it is created by lack of access. It's created by the built environment in many, many cases. So that's what I mean when I say that disability studies brings North and South Campus together. And one of my personal missions is to get medical humanities and disability studies more in dialogue with each other. Because I feel, as Annie was saying in the film, that disability studies can make medicine less about the doctor's perspective and more about a collaboration between doctor and patient. And very quickly, I will mention that our students, as was seen in the video, are unique. Our program is unique for giving students an opportunity to do internships and work with the disabled community, and also to give them a very different perspective, because many of them do go on to become doctors and work in the medical profession in different ways. And it transforms the way they think about that. So the last thesis I worked on, honors thesis in English, was written by a young woman who will become a doctor, and it was about the way doctors' use of language transforms patients' experience of illness, not the other way around. So that seems to me very important. Finally, and then I hope I'm not going on too long, I have the last thing I wanted to do was just very briefly talk about how this minor came into being. And as I said before when I started, it's a very long history. It was very hard won. The minor came together first because of the passion of Dr. Jane Spencer, who was dedicated to diversity here at UCLA and to access for people with disabilities and to disability studies. She was a lecturer in history here at UCLA. She earned her PhD in Latin American studies after surviving a very bad car accident that left her severely disabled and in a wheelchair. And she was chair of the Chancellor's Advisory Committee on Disability for over a decade. And she was a firecracker. I don't know how many of you knew her, but she had tremendous passion and commitment to this field. And she brought herding faculty at UCLA into a new endeavor. It's like herding cats. We're all really busy. We all live all over the place. No one wants to go to new meetings, but Jane created this thing called the Brown Bag Brigade. And for over 10 years, faculty met and tried to put the minor together. Jane did over 100 courses at UCLA that offered disability studies content. She recruited many of the faculty who are involved today. She brought this community together, but before she could complete her mission, she died. And then Lucy 2 years later, stepped up and held a meeting that just created magic and got the minor off the ground. I got involved because of that meeting, and that's why we're all here today. So I think that there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of enthusiasm, and there's a lot of devotion and tenacity that got this minor to where it is today, and it is being greeted with an enthusiasm that has made it more than worth it. Thanks.
Hi, I'm so grateful to be here, and that was just so comprehensive, Helen. I don't know what I can add, but I will try to add a few things. And Lucy, thank you for your generous introduction. As Lucy mentioned, I'm the current chair of the Disability Studies minor, and I'm a choreographer, meaning that I make dances, and I teach or profess in the Department of World Arts and Cultures / dance. I want to just share with you a little anecdote about my experience as a choreographer. In 1992, before I had a job here at UCLA, I was working with my colleague, a filmmaker, Margaret Williams, at a dance company, Canduco Dance Company. You actually saw some excerpts from that dance that was made in Andy's great video at the top. As we were working, I was learning about what it could mean to make a dance for dancers who were performing in wheelchairs, and to think about the job of a choreographer as the serious job of how do you represent the bodies that are on stage, the people who are embodied. And so we experimented a lot. And at one point, one day, Margaret, who was shooting all the rehearsals, shot a choreographic sequence through the wheels of a wheelchair. And as we all sat down at the end of rehearsal each day to look at what she had shot and to learn better about what we were doing, we all threw up our hands or held our nose and went, "Ugh, that's horrible. That's terrible, terrible, terrible." So we all knew that that was not the way forward. And the dancers, many of them said, "Well, we do not want to be portrayed in this way. We want to be neutral." And I took that to mean, in dance, there's a lot of talk about neutral. I took that to mean that they did not want disability to define them. But I think they also wanted to make it disappear right away. Like, oh, you're just not going to think about disability when you watch us dance. And I thought to myself, that's not possible right now. Right now, that's not possible. And this was 1992. And I thought to myself, actually, I get it. But in fact, what we have to do is claim our difference, claim our visibility, our humor, our sense of desire, our sexiness. All of us, all these different bodies, in order to then not change that we are visually acknowledged as this is a group of disabled and non-disabled dancers, but in fact so that when we say that, we don't mean what we have meant in the past, that actually disability doesn't mean an absence of individuality, subjectivity, capability, mischief, and humor. It's actually just a fact. So that's my story, and in fact, that was my first project thinking about what it might mean as a choreographer to represent bodies that were quite different than the sort of balletic Marvel heroes that we see on stage so often. And I became absolutely thrilled at the thought that I could continue to think about how it is that we literally stage who we are, how we put ourselves on stage, and the excitement of all of us being there together. So, like Helen, I had no idea there was a field called disability studies. I was just going about my business making these dances one after the other, and thinking about the ways in which ability does not need to be the kind of crown jewel, but in fact is entirely negotiable and nuanced in each and every one of us. And to be so fascinated with the way that each of us are here and embody ourselves, and that movement is enough for me. So I didn't know there was a field, and then I began to be aware, and I had Lucy and Helen, and then suddenly, would you teach a course? And I got excited about that, so I taught my first course, re-choreographing disability. In other words, restaging the meanings of disability in the body. And then they said, would you like to chair the minor? Because Helen needs a little rest over here. And so I'm here. And it's been thrilling because I actually got to teach the Disability Studies 101 course, which is our foundation course, Perspectives on Disability, last year, which meant that as a choreographer, I got to actually look at the ways other fields address this question. What is disability as a lens for understanding our human experience? I wanted to step back a little bit, though. So I told you my story. I just want to share with you a slightly, hopefully it's correct, historical story. So if we jump back to the 60s, which fortunately practically everybody in this room was alive for, because most of the time when I'm talking to students, they were not, of course. So how great to be amongst you. So back then, right, we see like this enormous activism, civil rights activism, anti-war protests, and of course the women's movement, the second wave of feminism. This incredible sense of people being activated. And one of the kind of key ideas at that moment was the notion that the personal is political. And I think that probably it's safe to say that, hi Jessica, okay, maybe you weren't alive in the 60s, but that's okay, I feel like you were. That idea that whoever we are, or whatever our experience is not only something that belongs to us, but it belongs to the web of experience. It is political and social and part of something much larger. So what emerged from that time were all of these movements, the women's movement, the gay liberation movement, and similarly as these movements were on the ground and people demonstrating and coming together, in the university, in the academy, there became new projects, new areas of knowledge that began to be addressed. And we started to see in the early 70s women's studies programs, queer studies programs, critical race studies, post-colonial studies. And it's not, it's not an accident that this was happening. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. Am I right on the date? Okay, good, phew. And so it's, thank you, Ben, thank you. It's not an accident or a surprise that disability studies programs also have been bursting with energy around the country since these political movements. And I want to say something very important, that whether we're talking women's studies or queer studies, or importantly today, disability studies, these are not projects of investigation or clubs for people who are identifying as disabled, or identifying as women, or identifying as queer. They are actually providing a lens to look at the systems that hold the inequality, that hold inequality in place. And so they are really humanistic visions of the possibility of equality and justice across our experience. And so it's also not a surprise then that scholars and artists from all across the academy come together to address disability, because in a way what it does, by looking at the oppression of disability or the ways in which there is injustice, we all come together with the same project, which is to address justice. And I want to just say some of the fields, I know Helen addressed this too, that our professors come from to think about disability studies: medicine, law, genetics, literature, history, psychology, sociology, gerontology, philosophy, languages, theater, visual art, dance, music, urban studies. The list goes on and on and on. It truly is, we talk a lot about interdisciplinarity. It truly is, an interdisciplinary project. I also want to speak specifically about our program. Again, I hope my facts are correct, but in 2010, there were 15 students in the program. Good. And then there were 34 students in 2013-14 that joined the program. Our foundation course, Perspectives on Disability, first taught and written by Helen Deutsch, had initially 12 students in it.
Maybe even a little less.
Oh dear, maybe a little less, okay. This past year, we had 80 students in the core course, and as I understand it, coming up this year, we're going to run that same course once each quarter, 80 times 3. That's 240. I did the math. Okay. The program is transformative for all of our students who learn to think about disability beyond care and caring, care and repair, but as an important part of our diversity. They understand that difference is a catalyst for innovation. I also want to, speaking of our students, I want to just tell you some of the places they're coming from. They're majors in other departments. We have students right now from anthropology, biology, English, gender studies, history, human biology and sociology, linguistics and psychology, neuroscience, psychology, psychobiology, sociology, and my own department, World Arts and Cultures / dance. All right. I have just a few more quick things to say. Thank you for your time. Our graduate students have been very excited about the Disability Studies minor, but there is no program for them. Some of them come and take a graduate level version of our foundation course, but there is a desire out there for a graduate certificate in disability studies. It's something we hope to do in the future. It's, as you know, we all come together to teach courses in this program. Without an endowed chair, we don't really have a magnetic center. There's sort of, we float. We need an anchor, and I hope that that is something we will grow towards, because we surely are growing. I just want to say a quick word about diversity. It's really a very deep and profound concern on the campus, and on campuses all across the country. And of course, the diversity issues today in 2014 are not the same as they were in the 1960s, but neither have they gone away. And we've begun to talk about the ways in which discrimination is not based on individual bigotry, but is actually deeply within the fabrics of our institutions. It's spoken about in some ways as institutional microaggression. And so we are continuing to work on diversity, and the study of disability studies is an opportunity for us to think about diversity in a deeper sense, and its intersections with issues around poverty, gender, race, and so on. Lastly, I thought I would just end with, I wanted to share one more little tiny bit of my own work with you. The consideration of disability for me has gone beyond thinking about physical or motor disability to think about the many ways in which we are complex persons. And I did a project with veterans at the West LA VA hospital. They were in a combat rehab unit, and I really wanted to have an opportunity to understand what it meant or what it felt like to return after serving in the US military. So we're just going to show a little tiny trailer of my project, which is called Action Conversations, and thank you so much for your time.
You know, it's going to be dangerous out there today, soldier. Yes, Lieutenant. At the end of the first night, I mean, it was fun. The only problem was, like, after months and months, I mean, it was really fun still. And then they said, we're going to make a show out of it.
I was playing war with my younger cousins, you know, about 7 young boys, and we're all running around shooting dart guns at each other, and I had a blast. I was just like, this is why I joined the military, because this is what I thought it was.
How was it, man? It must have boom, boom, double tanks and shit, man. How was it, man? It must have been crazy, man. Fire! Boom, 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 boom. How many people did you kill? Hell.
It's all symbolic for me, basically. I mean, I can relate to every single piece that's in it, you know.
One morning, I wake up at the psychiatric hospital of the VA in Phoenix. One of the moments I think that's most difficult for me is the 1-minute bio. I called my mother in the middle of the night, and I called her to tell her that I loved her and I wanted to say goodbye.
Back up! Is that the best line you can make? Aaron! You have all I need? No, sir. You sure? Yes, drop it, give me 10. That's her. What?
The reason I was reticent for doing the faking the cry thing, because like that's hard for me to do. And I remember being numb for a while. I was telling Aaron and sharing with you guys, like I had to, part of me had to, like he was laughing at me. I had to punch myself in the eye of my father's funeral to get myself to feel enough to cry.
Cry. I don't fake cry. As a vet, there's a lot of things I fake. Crying isn't one. When I go home to see my mom, visit, I want her to think I'm doing good. I want her to think I'm progressing in the program. I don't want her to worry about me. So when I go home, I don't fake cry. I fake normal. I never thought in a million years that I could stand up in front of a bunch of people like this and say anything, let alone, you know.
Oh, hey, I got the microphone. We'll give that to the interpreter. Hello, everyone. This is so nice to be here. When Lucy mentioned about this partnership, I thought it would be important to talk a little more deeply about what partnership meant. I grew up deeply within the deaf community. My parents are deaf, and I, along with my family members, are profoundly deaf. So this is how we identify as deaf individuals. When I face the community, people look at me, general community, as if I need help. What do I need help with? What do they want to help me for? They have pity for me, or they think of me as less than, or I have some kind of a loss. I went to the School for the Deaf, so I was proud of the language that I use, American Sign Language. I never saw myself as a disability. You can look at a disability as a positive or a negative. The disability is in the negative aspect of what you do not have. A lot of deaf people don't think that way. We know that we physically cannot hear, but we can communicate. We use sign language. We use our eyes. We express ourselves through our native language. There's the other kind of disability that has a different perspective. But we didn't have it. Our world is a beautiful world. When I went to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., I was impacted with this this deaf gain, which was a sign that they used, deaf gain, how deaf people contribute to the community. For example, people often look at sign language with babies. When a baby is born, we teach them sign language. They learn it faster than spoken language. So this is something that the deaf community, through language, can can contribute to the larger hearing population. We talk about space, deaf space, and architecture from the deaf perspective. For example, if you look at the kitchen, there are lots of barriers in a kitchen. The energy is lost in that sense. You remove those barriers and we have a big open space. There's much more lighting. The energy is much stronger. So we talk about deaf space. This deaf space can be contributed to architecture in general. There are a lot of things in society that deaf people can contribute to. A lot of people in society look at deaf people as needing something to be fixed. If we switch that perspective and what deaf people can contribute to society, we have a partnership with Deaf Gain. This is a wonderful opportunity for me as I arrived here at UCLA in the last 2 years. We have the American Sign Language program. I know that UCLA has a strong medical school here, and they have a pathological or medical view of wanting to fix any problems that individuals have. We are able to, as deaf individuals and scholars, help the medical profession look through this lens in a different perspective on how to approach deaf people as whole individuals. Again, often people will look at the deaf community and not realize that they're everywhere. You have a deaf neighbor, you may have a coworker, somebody in your community who is deaf. You're going to have individuals who are disabled or deaf anywhere in society. And individuals can at any time become disabled themselves. We have this stigma that people are afraid of deaf people. It's a new journey, a new path, a new identity. It's a challenge for a lot of individuals. You have to imagine yourself in the deaf perspective. Suppose you become deaf overnight. That can happen. Remember, we are okay. We're amazing people. We don't feel like we're any different than you. We identify with you. We are the same as any other human being. What makes us human is beyond just our specific abilities or disabilities. It's wonderful to have this discussion. I wanted to share with you an amazing experience here that we had within our ASO program. We teach American Sign Language 1, 2, and 3 in the first year. In the second year, we teach levels 4, 5, and 6. I wanted the students to get back to our community. Many of you are familiar with the Museum of Tolerance. Is that correct? You're all familiar with that? We went there. We noticed that there was no accessibility for deaf people in the museum. This history of the Holocaust is important for all of us. Deaf people need to know this just as much as anybody else. We wanted to make it accessible for deaf individuals going to the museum. My ASL students decided to go to the museum and work closely with the basement exhibit that they have there, the permanent exhibit that they have there, which is audio-based. They decided to take all the audio tapes and do transcriptions from the tapes. They then did translations of the tapes and were able to put them on iPads so that anybody could go in with their iPad, deaf individuals, and see the full exhibit, have an authentic experience just like hearing people do through American Sign Language on their iPads. This is something that my program has given back to the community at large. I wanted to show you a clip from this. Okay? So this is the idea of what it would look like on the iPad. You just log in, and here it is. So when you see this symbol on the left, you click on it, you see the sign and the written text with it. That's one of the examples of how we can become more interactive within the community at large instead of separating or segregating the deaf community. It's how individuals in my community can participate in activities in society. Instead of feeling apart from society, they get to feel actually included within society. This is an innovation that my program has come up with, and it's how the communities can get together inclusively. Thank you. One more thing. I forgot I wanted to add something. This is a great story. One of my students who took American Sign Language from me, what I do in my class is ask them why they're taking it. And I ask them what their majors are. One gal said she wanted to be a speech therapist. She wanted to teach deaf people how to speak properly. I thought, okay, that's fine. By the end of the quarter, her perspective had completely changed. She realized that there wasn't a need for this medical perspective. Instead, she could work in a partnership. She could be more of an ally for deaf individuals and what they particularly want. That's one example of being inspired by changing the lens of disability and ability, and how they get involved in the culture than just the disability.
I might stand just so that I can see you all. Yeah, I like this more. Okay. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, you can. Okay. So thank you for spending the afternoon. This was so remarkable, and I hope that my story will help fit into everything else that you've heard earlier today. And thank you, Lucy, again for the introduction earlier today. So good afternoon. My name is Jessica Kiamat, and I graduated from UCLA this past June with a bachelor's in psychology and a minor in disability studies. My involvement with communities of people with special needs began in high school when I was a volunteer for Friendship Circle of Los Angeles, an organization providing unique opportunities for Jewish kids with special needs to create authentic friendships with their peers of all abilities. It wasn't until I joined the Disability Studies minor that I explored my interest from an academic perspective, and my interest then became a passion. From my initial studies in the classes for the minor, I was exposed to a very subtle, yet very powerful phenomenon. I noticed how frequently our society uses words like special needs and disabilities, but how it changed from thinking about disability, which implies a lack of ability, to thinking about people as having different abilities is much more accepting and understanding. What sets the Disability Studies minor apart from every other program I was involved with on campus was the investment of our mentors in our growth. I felt comfortable reflecting, questioning, and pushing the limits of what I knew because of people who were guiding me. I have also simultaneously always been very interested in the sciences. And after beginning to learn about the medical and social models of disability through my classes and internship in the minor, I was inclined to always be a student and hopefully a teacher in the disability studies field, and to be a leader in my profession. I am now applying for master's programs in genetic counseling, and I am determined to bridge the two communities that historically may have seemed separate, yet can benefit so much from each other. The community of people with disabilities and the genetic counseling community. It is because of my studies in the minor that I was able to explore the social model of many medical conditions through learning from people actually living with such a condition. I learned how people with autism and deaf individuals value their identity and desire to be understood. That when they don't view themselves as having deficits, but rather different ways of experiencing the world, then my responsibility is to honor appreciate, and value their identity, especially as a future healthcare professional. The minor provided me with a very strong foundation, curiosity, and passion to work towards being a leader for other healthcare providers, to teach them how to incorporate the social model of disability into the practice of medicine, especially in regards to genetics, and show them how they can be part of a compassionate community of healthcare providers who are aware of and understand varying views of abilities.
So this ultimately can affect the interactions of the providers to their patients so that providers can look beyond the diagnosis and actually see that first and foremost, they're dealing with a person, with a human being. While exploring how my studies were influencing my future career plans, I was also encouraged to push the limits of my own community. I'm Persian and Jewish. I was born and raised right here in Los Angeles, went to Sinai Temple, some of you might know. I quickly noticed that my own Persian Jewish community is historically not very accepting and welcoming of its members who have some sort of limitation. I dedicated my capstone project in the minor to studying the history of this mentality. And I took a proactive approach to make my community more aware of our responsibility and to provide the tools to actually be an inclusive temple and community. Our community strongly identifies with their Jewish tradition, and Judaism, in fact, has a very accepting view of people of different abilities. So I've created a curriculum for Jewish day schools here in Los Angeles, that's where we're starting, and my own temple, where I'm in fact the Hebrew school teacher for kids with special needs. The curriculum explores the Jewish take on including people with disabilities in our community, specifically by exploring teachings, prayers, and biblical stories, followed by the opportunity for community members and students to interact with members in our community who have different abilities. The goal is to provide the Persian Jewish community with an understanding of our responsibility as Jews to be leaders in creating inclusive environments. And through exposure to these ideas from a young age for the students in the day school, it's my aim that students will internalize the mentality of identifying and appreciating different abilities and how others' experiences can actually enrich our own. I'm eternally thankful to the Disability Studies minor program and its faculty and mentors for teaching me the foundation of my studies in this field and for supporting and encouraging me to continue being an advocate and a leader and to push boundaries so that people of all abilities are included and appreciated in their respective communities. Thank you.
I just want to thank you all again for your time and to thank everyone who's speaking here today. I'm so proud of my colleagues. We're so proud of our amazing students. I know we went a little long. I know we started a little late, but I don't know if do we have some time for questions? I know we're supposed to end at 2, and I don't want to impose on people in terms of time.
I think a few minutes.
Just a few minutes. We are more than happy to take a couple questions if people have them. Yes.
I have a quick anecdote. You mentioned that in past centuries the word cripple was used very freely, and I don't think you have to go back that far.
Mm-hmm.
When my husband was around 13 or 14 years old, he'd been having a lot of trouble with one knee, and the doctors thought the best thing for it would be to encase his entire leg in a cast, which meant that he couldn't go to high school for about 6 months. He was at Roosevelt High School then. And later, when he saw the transcript of that time, they had a visiting teacher come during that time, he discovered that he'd been dropped out of what was called Roosevelt High School and enrolled in Cripple High School.
Wow. Wow. That's very interesting, and you're right. I mean, you don't have to go back to the
around
medieval period.
1939 or 40, the LA City School.
Absolutely. And that speaks also to a larger old normal in this country, which was to segregate disabled kids of all kinds, put them in homes, put them in institutions, keep them away from the rest of us, which, thank heaven, is changing, has changed profoundly, and will continue to change.
You know, even today in education, very often you have a special education class where you put children who need accommodations, but But quite often, those same children are your gifted learners as well. And our educational system doesn't support the idea that one may have learning challenges or differences while at the same time having gifts in other areas.
Do you think the language will even change more to transform from disabled to a different word? Because disabled, from what you said, it communicates also, instead of diversity of abilities, it again puts people sort of not as able.
I think that's an ongoing question in communities, in the disability community, in the scholarly community. People play with the word a lot. There's like academics love to put things in parentheses to be super subversive, right? Disability, differently able. And there's all kinds of discussion about some people like differently abled, some people want to proudly claim disabled, just in the same way that CRIP has been reclaimed by some disabled people as a badge of pride. So I would say, like everything else in disability studies, it's a subject of very lively conversation and different opinions. Yes?
Not every disability is visible.
Mm-hmm.
And as an example, we have a family member who has very low IQ. She's technically retarded. But she's been raised to not be aware of that difference. And life has been very challenging for her, and I think her parents and family haven't given her the tools, you know, to be able to deal with that and say, you are challenged in certain areas, and that's okay. And, you know, there are resources available. Do you have any comment about how we approach that kind of difference? You know, that kind of, she most certainly is the invisible difference. She most certainly is disabled and is continually striving to compete, you know, to get a job and so forth, and never gets the job and can't support herself. And she's nearly 40 and really lives in an illusion. I will be working with her. I think she'll come down and stay with me and try to get some of that figured out. But it's a very delicate matter at this point in her adult life.
You raised such a really important point. And it's making me think about one thing that comes up a lot when I teach the introduction to the minor. I also teach a course on disability memoir, illness memoir. The kind of relationship between disability and illness is very interesting and not 100% overlap, but that's another set of questions. But the question of invisible disability is really important, very powerful. It raises a whole set of different issues. There's a rhetoric of passing in the disability community that's very like the rhetoric of passing in the gay, lesbian community. But one thing that comes up when I teach these memoirs, which are about all kinds of things, including various forms of intellectual disability, mental illness, is that diagnosis is both good and bad, right? So if you're suffering from something, like chronic fatigue is an interesting example. This is just one strain of what you were asking, but you're sick. You know something is wrong with you. You can't function. You can't get out of bed, and you're called someone with the yuppie flu, and no one takes you seriously, right? You can't get the help you need. You can't get the medical leave that you need. You can't get the, you know, the support that you need. So there's something sometimes good about having a disability, having some kind of problem recognized and acknowledged so that that support is given. So it's certainly not about erasing disability or not acknowledging it. As Vic was saying, it's about recognizing it, but not stigmatizing it, which is a different thing. That's the beginning of an answer, but I think you're raising a lot of really important sort of questions that come up when we talk about disability, especially invisible disability and intellectual disability.
Last question.
I have a question for Ben. The young woman who was in the iPad demonstration, was she a student, and how long had she taken American Sign Language if she was a student?
She was in the program for 2 years. About 2 years, yes. Really, it's a challenge because you have to become fluent in the language, and it takes a lot longer. A lot of people pick it up quicker. Some students have to practice a little bit more, but we worked together. We went through this tour. There was a lot of feedback and a lot of support, but we had to make the final proof before we sent it out to the community. We want to be careful with the language, the quality of the language, because we wanted equal access, and that's a challenge for us, but it was a great experience for the students.
I was just struck by her ability to be emotional and because usually when you see sign language, not from yourself, it's very static. But she was very into it, and I just was curious. So you could do that within 2 years?
Well, really. I always tell my students, when you get in the class, you have to keep your heart open. Be ready for a new language acquisition. You can't memorize everything. It takes a lot of things other than just the vocabulary. It's like any other spoken language. You have to get into it completely to immerse yourself in it to become fluent. You can't just memorize a phrase. That's the part I had to help with on those tapes.
And can you teach us how to say thank you very much for this afternoon?
Yes, okay. Just exercise your hands now, stand up. Anyway, or just say thank you. This is it, thank you. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
You know what I've learned why we applaud like this? Why we applaud like this? Hearing people can hear the applause, but deaf people are visual and they see it in the air. So this is how we applaud.
And can we just, there's just one thing I want to say, just to thank all of you, and also just to say that Lucy was very generous in her praise, but we just want to say how proud we are of the minor and how excited we are about how much there is in our future. And we really appreciate you giving us the time to
And
talk
can I
about
say,
that.
it came across very clearly.
Thank you.
I for one, very briefly, I heard I'm so impressed with what you're doing. And also the excitement of the students.
Yes.
The way they open their minds.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much.